Welcome to Nobody Told Me. I'm Jan Black.
And I'm Laura Owens. On August 26th, 2015, the lives of Andy and Barbara Parker changed forever when their daughter, Alison, a news reporter for WDBJ, was murdered along with her cameraman, Adam Ward, while conducting an interview on live television near Roanoke, Virginia. The nation was stunned by the killings, and President Barack Obama said he was heartbroken. The gunman was a former reporter for the TV station who killed himself hours later following a car chase with the police.
And on the day of his daughter's death, while his emotions were still raw, Andy Parker vowed on national television to do whatever it takes to end gun violence in America. Andy is our guest on this episode of our podcast. He's written about his daughter's murder and his fight for gun safety in the new book, For Alison. Andy, we thank you so much for joining us. It is an honor to have you with us.
Thank you, Laura and Jan. I appreciate your having me on.
Andy, you say your book is about showing people in painful detail what it's like to receive the worst phone call of your life and feel your guts get ripped right out on the kitchen floor. So why did you decide to write it? Because it must have been so extremely painful to go through this again.
Well, I felt like I had to do it for Alison. I had to tell the story, and that was one component of it. But there was another component that I needed to do something to, I guess, keep me out of from descending into an abyss. And so that's one reason. That's another reason that I did it.
And when you first heard about the attack, where were you, and what was your reaction?
I was asleep, and and Barbara, my wife, she woke me up. She said, because we never really watched Alison at that early in the morning, because we would be able to see her on the webcast, and so we really, we just kind of wait, get up, watch her. What she did, later on that morning. But that morning, Barbara, she was up at 7:30 and she saw like nothing. And then she got a call that said, from Chris Hurst, that said, there's been shots that have been fired. And she woke me up at 7:30 and I was kind of completely out of it. And I thought, well, this can't be right. And obviously it was right.
And take us through the rest of that day.
For about an hour, we were in complete shock and agony because, Alison would text me every single day. She would text me. We would talk every day. And so as soon as I heard this news, I sent her a text. I called her. It went straight to voicemail. The texts weren't returned. And I just, in my heart of hearts, I knew there was an issue and there was a problem. And so as the minutes ticked on, we called the sheriff's department. We called everybody, any and everyone in law enforcement that we could, to see what was going on up there. And it was an hour and a half of just sheer hell waiting for whatever news was coming. And finally, the news director at WDBJ called me and told me, Mr. Parker, I'm sorry. And that's kind of when as you mentioned, I just crashed to the floor.
And I can imagine an initial question that you had was, who did this? And what did you find out about who did this and why?
We, at that point in time, at the moment, I guess I really wasn't asking who did this and why. I was just, I was completely caught up in this. This is just, I'm stunned. My daughter's dead. And then it was later on, I guess it was a couple of hours later, when we were directed to a staging area near the marina at Smith Mountain Lake, and I met with the deputies and the assistant general manager of WDBJ, and they said, well, we have an idea who did this. I think I remember saying, just give me, if you find this guy, I want time alone with him. I want to just because I wanted to kill him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it was they said at that point in time, we think we know who this is. And they didn't really share that with me until, I guess, later that day when I found out. And when I don't even like to use the guy's name, but it's Vester Flanagan. And I thought, who the hell is Vester Flanagan? I don't know who this person is. Well, that was the name of the reporter that was the former reporter for WDBJ that killed her, and who went by the name of Bryce Williams.
And what was his motive?
From what we understand, he was doing this to avenge the Charleston murders that occurred a couple of months prior. That was his motive.
But this had nothing to do with Alison at all.
No, except that, the only thing that we can kind of piece together is that she, when she was an intern there, I mean, that was the only time she ever had any interaction with a guy. Mm-hmm. And when she was an intern at WDBJ, she did some ride-arounds with him, and she mentioned that, they're driving along, she's trying to make conversation, and she said, "Oh, Cottonwood Drive." She was like looking at a street sign, and she said, "Oh, I know someone that lives up there." And somehow this guy decided that Cottonwood was a racist designation, and so that was one of his motivations, that he figured, well, she's racist, Cottonwood. I mean, it made no sense at all. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, this guy was gay. His family had disowned him, and so he had no support at all. I mean, that's not to defend his state of mind or anything that obviously what he did, but he was a mess.
And how was he able to get a gun?
He had no record. So he could go in and purchase a gun because he had no record. Now, that's one of the things that I've been trying to work on is an extreme risk protective order, or, what some states are calling red flag laws. I mean, this guy had been fired by 2 other stations and escorted to the door under police escort. So there were multiple signs there that he shouldn't have been able to purchase a weapon. Mm-hmm. And yet he was. These kinds of things slip through the cracks. But when you have someone like Alison's shooter that are able to slip through the system despite being walked to the door by police on multiple occasions, they shouldn't be able to buy a gun.
And in the book, you talk about how after she died, you went to a local firearms store to see how easy the process is to buy a gun. And I really was not familiar with the process before I read the book. What exactly does it entail, and how easy is it?
It's real easy. I was kind of in a daze at that point in that day, and I thought, well, like you, how easy is it to buy a gun? It's real easy. You give them your license, they do a quick background check, and there you go. And he was even touting, he didn't know who it was, but he was even saying, "Oh yeah, this is real easy. You can be in and out of here in 15 minutes."
And you don't have to disclose any mental illnesses.
Correct.
Why is the problem getting worse? I mean, what happened to your daughter shocked the country. It was one of these things that you would just think, okay, that's one of these moments where we would say, okay, something has to be done now. It has to be done now.
Things need to change.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it happens again. It happens again. And sadly, I think in some ways we've become almost numb to it when we see the headlines. Our jaws don't drop maybe like they used to. It's, oh no, it's happened again. Why?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right to a certain degree. But I think the flip side of that is that people are saying, you know what, this could happen to someone in my family. Sure. Or it could happen to me. And I think that why it's still happening and why we have no progress is because the NRA, they own the Republican Party now, which is still in control. However, that dynamic is changing. If you look at what happened in Virginia in 2017 in the Virginia elections, the gun issue was the number 2 issue in the state, and Democrats picked up almost a majority. I mean, literally, they didn't get the majority because of a drawing. I mean, there was a tied seat, and they had to draw to pick the delegate. So it's getting there. I mean, you saw what happened in the midterms just this last November. And the gun issue is out there, and it is resonating with the American people. So while the Republicans act like 2017 in Virginia and the midterms in 2018 didn't happen, they're just going about their business and cozying up to the NRA, things are changing. And they will change, and that's why I think there is hope for this country. It's like civil rights. I think that it took a long time to gain traction, but I think we're getting there, and I think it's going to happen.
And after something like this, or like the other tragedies that we mentioned, after these things happen, I feel like, for me personally, I feel uncomfortable going into a lot of social situations where I feel like there's going to be a lot of people, or even if I'm just going to the mall, I feel like I have to look over my shoulder. And that's a horrible feeling to have, to think that you can't even do innocent activities without being a little bit nervous for your safety. Do you think we need to live our lives in fear of what could happen, or how should we live them? How would Alison want us to live them?
Sure. Your point is well taken. People shouldn't live in fear. And, the fact that the NRA is saying, well, Second Amendment rights, that trumps, no pun intended, but that's the price you pay for liberty. And that's wrong. I mean, we shouldn't be living in fear. We shouldn't have to be looking over our shoulder, going to the grocery store or going to the movie theater. I mean, we shouldn't have to do that. So, no. And I think, again, that's why the vast majority of the American people look at this issue and go, we got to do something here. We have to do something, and that's why they voted in 2018 and 2017 the way they did.
What kind of common sense measures would you like to see taken and that you think could be taken in this country to prevent gun violence?
It's pretty easy stuff. And it's not anything that, quote unquote, infringes on the Second Amendment. Universal background checks. To drive a car, you got to have a license, and you should have one to own a gun. You close loopholes for flea market and online sales. It's way too easy for the wrong people to circumvent a legitimate gun shop. And, I mentioned that when we were talking about that earlier. You go into a gun shop, you apply, you get a background check. But there are these flea markets that there is no background check. So, this is why ISIS encourages their recruits to go to America where it's easy to buy guns. I mean, you keep people off the no-fly list. Known or suspected terrorists that are on the no-fly list, you keep them from buying guns. Right now, that doesn't happen. So there's that. There's as I mentioned earlier, the extreme risk protective order. If there's somebody that law enforcement thinks is a danger to themselves or a danger to someone else, a protective order at this point or a restraining order will keep the person away, but it doesn't keep their guns away. So there are states that are doing that, and I think that's going to eventually happen nationwide. And then the other stuff that's pretty easy, too, is you ban assault weapons. You ban assault-type AR-15s. I mean, it's just a killing machine, plain and simple, and they have no business on our streets.
I guess what kind of scares me about this is even if all of this is done, you still have to worry that the madmen are going to figure out some way to get guns, and the guys who are really going to be a threat are going to figure out how to do it. Well,
listen, it's like wearing a seatbelt. A seatbelt is going to give you a better chance if you're in a horrible accident. Will it save your life 100% of the time? Maybe not. But at least it's going to give you a better chance. And so what these measures would do would give us a seatbelt. I mean, it would give us a better chance to at least prevent some of this stuff from happening. And, the argument that the other side presents is, we need more guns. I mean, hell, there are more guns than people in this country. And so that argument doesn't fly because, that it doesn't work. If you can save a life, if you can save many lives, you're not going to save everyone. But to do nothing is not the answer.
And you write that your book, For Alison, is not a grief memoir, it's an anger memoir. And I'm wondering, how has her murder changed the way you feel about humanity?
That's a good question. I think there is hope there. I think that people are genuinely, for the most part, good. I think that there is a segment of this population that is not. But I think what we're trying to do and what I'm trying to accomplish, and those in the gun violence prevention movement are seeking to do, I think will ultimately prevail. And I think it's because of the humanity of our country as a whole. There's going to be a segment there that, regardless of what you do, they're not going to buy in. But you just have to save them from themselves, and that's kind of what we're trying to do.
I love how in the book you share so many stories about Alison and who she was as a person and how proud you were of her. It just really shines through in the book. What was she like growing up, and when did she decide to get into journalism?
Oh, man, she was one of those kids that, everything she touched, she did well. She was a great gymnast. She was just a phenomenal dancer. I think that had she not gone into journalism, she probably could have gone to Broadway because, she really had the talent to do it. And I say that as someone who's been on Broadway in a past life, and it might be somewhat subjective, but it's, I think, objective too. I mean, I saw the talent there, but everything she did well. And I guess the pivotal moment for her was she was on a band trip. They did a trip the year before they went to Disney World, and then that next year they went to Atlanta and they toured CNN. And there was the picture of her posing in front of the CNN building. And I think that was kind of when the light bulb went off and she said, I want to do this. This is what I want to do. And she did it with a vengeance. When she was a kid, she didn't want to just compete. She wanted to win. And it was the same way when she got into journalism and she wanted to be the first one to break the story. She wanted to be the first. And she did. I'll never forget when the executive producer for CBS Evening News came down for her. I didn't know he was there, and he introduced himself at her celebration of life 5 days after she was killed. He introduced himself and he said, Andy, I just wanted to let you know she was going to be with us one day. And I have no doubt. I mean, I was like, yeah, she would have been. So much potential there that's the thing that I lament. I'll never see her on the national news.
You write very movingly in the book about how you felt her spirit since she's been gone. It's very touching. You say, for one thing, that yellow butterflies seem to be her preferred way of touching you. Tell us more about that, about how you felt her wink and that sort of thing. Well,
I never used to, when you'd hear about the touches from the afterlife and all that, I always thought, that's just BS. No, that isn't real. And then it happened to me. We were at one of the last things she did was with the Roanoke Greek Festival. She was kind of like doing the story of it's a big festival every year in Roanoke. And so we went back up there not long after her death, and we met with the folks, and we were sitting down for lunch or whatever. We got a big bottle of wine, and it was not like sparkling wine. It was just like regular white wine. And we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, the cork just flies out of the bottle. And we're all looking at it going, that doesn't happen. I mean, so... It just, if it were champagne, I would get it. But, I mean, it was things like that. I mean, there were, the picture on Barbara's desk of Alison, and it would literally, like, move daily. And I would, like, measure it. I'd put something parallel to it, and it would move. And I would, like, be jumping up and down on the floor to see if I could get it to shake it. And it wouldn't do it. It was little interesting things like that. The butterflies that would come out of nowhere when we were paddling. I mean, it kind of gets me. It just gets me going every time I think about it. But they were real. I think a lot of people would say, well, that's just he's imagining this stuff. It's a figment of his imagination, but no, it's not. Uh-huh. I mean, they really happened to me. And it makes you feel good.
And you say with Alison that something that means a lot to you is that there are no regrets in your relationship with her, and that you don't think to yourself, if only I'd said this or if only I'd done that. What did that teach you about the importance of expressing yourself to those that you love?
I wish I'd said I loved you more. But I think, as I mentioned in the book, we weren't that kind of family, I guess, that, it's like, I love you, I love you, I love you. It was sort of, we just knew. We knew we loved each other. We didn't have to really just constantly say, I love you, I love you, I love you, even though that in retrospect might have been good. But we knew that we loved each other.
How do you feel about social media in the aftermath of Alison's killing?
I mean, I could write another book about that entirely. I've had a war with Google and what they did with YouTube and the struggles that I had trying to take down the videos of her getting killed.
Yeah.
And not only that, but, just the hoaxers that descended up on the videos. I had a YouTube channel back in my days as an actor. I uploaded several commercials that I just wanted to archive. And, I didn't think anybody would pay any attention to it until she was killed. And then they all descended on those. And I was inundated like locusts with people saying, well, he's a crisis actor. The whole thing was made up. The whole thing is a hoax. It's stunning. And I've collaborated with Lenny Posner, whose son was lost at Sandy Hook, who's been able to take a lot of the stuff down, for obvious reasons. I can't go through these videos. I can't do it. I can't watch it. I can't see it. But Lenny has been able to do it for me. And as a matter of fact, I'm working with Georgetown University Civil Rights Law Clinic, and we're in process of filing legal action against Google for what they've done. Mm-hmm. And so I guess that tells you what you need to know about social media, that we're going after them. It's a cesspool. And it's one of those things that you wouldn't think would be a byproduct of her death, but it is.
So many people are familiar with Alison's story, and they know her as the woman who was in the headlines and for this great tragedy, but don't know who she was as a person. If you could impart one sentence to say who Alison was to the people who are listening right now, who was she?
Alison was the kindest soul I've ever known.
Andy, I know you ended up seeking grief counseling in the aftermath of Alison's murder, and I'm wondering, for other people who are listening who've suffered a loss, did you find grief counseling helpful? Would you recommend it to others?
I think everybody's different. I didn't find it that helpful. I found it more validating than anything else. It's like, well, this is what you're going through. Yep. I didn't find anything for me that was life-changing. But again, that's me. And I think everybody's circumstance is different.
What are the best ways for people to learn about gun control?
Well, I think people can, buy my book. they can go on, because, in the book, I talk about the various gun violence prevention groups that are out there. Everytown, Giffords, Brady, Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. There are several major groups out there that are in the fight on this, and people can take a look at that. They can go online. That's what I tell people, and that's what I think is part of the message with this book. It's a memoir. It's a current affairs book, and it's a call to action. People need to get involved, and they need to not only just vote, but they need to get involved. And one way they can do it is to join a Brady group, join a Moms Demand Action group. That's out there online, and it's in the book. And I think that this is definitely something that people need to do.
And Andy, how can people connect with you on the internet and on social media if they'd like to learn more about your story?
I have a site called andysfight.com. It's andysfight.com. And there are links to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, where they can buy the book and just get updates on the news that surrounds the book.
Well, Andy, we want to thank you so much for being a guest on the show and for your really honest and vulnerable answers. We really appreciate that.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate being on the program, and thanks again.
Our sincere thanks to Andy Parker for being our guest. Again, Andy's book is titled For Alison, The Murder of a Young Journalist and a Father's Fight for Gun Safety. I'm Jan Black.
And I'm Laura Owens.
You've been listening to Nobody Told Me. Thank you so much for joining us.